What's wrong with you people?
Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast. And are you called to ministry? Southwestern Seminary offers over 50 unique degrees that will provide the training you need to live your calling. If you aren't sure which degree is the best option for you, check out swbts.edu/calling and take the quiz to find out. This quiz will help you sort through your interest and discover which degrees could fit your calling so you can find your calling. Find the quiz at swbts.edu/calling. And Kyle, call me Tyrone. Hey, how are you doing, man? It was good to see you this week.
Yeah, we got to hang out a little bit at the Southern Baptists of Texas convention. I was not there for long.
I think I only saw you before it. I don't think we really saw each other.
I think I said goodbye as I was walking out because I wasn't there for long. I got to do a lunch panel that Anthony Swada put on church revitalization. So literally, I dropped in, did a lunch panel, and then left immediately after that.
Must be nuts. Well, I am fixing the SBTC one letter at a time. And I can't wait for the headline to read, Farmersville pastor opposes pro-Israel resolution. But that was not exactly what happened. I made a friendly amendment to one of the resolutions, and that resolution, it would have been any of them. If I could ever find a grammar error in any of those resolutions, I was going to be the guy. I've done that before, and I will do it again. And so this time, there was a pro-Israel resolution in there and calling us to pray, affirming the work that Sin Relief does, all of that kind of, I don't really know what it says. I just found the grammar error. And the very end of it, I don't remember what the phrase was, but it was a reference from Scripture. And then it said, Psalms 122 whatever verse, and like my head just immediately started twitching when I saw it. And so I decided I was going to, in a day where there's talk of I got to be careful here. So anyway, I decided I was going to stand up and correct this thing. Even better,
Naturally.
after I decided to do that, I found out that who was chairing the resolutions committee? It was my professor from Southwestern Seminary, Dr. Madison Grace, who we almost killed on a podcast episode once before.
With a one-chip challenge, that's better. Right.
So this guy has edited many papers of mine, not so graciously as a Dr. Grace, but anyway, I had the whole thing written up that he was going to be the one that presented it, assuming that. And so it was all of this stuff. I hope you find this amendment much more friendly than you did my papers in Baptist Heritage. But here I stand, I can do no other, blah, 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 and all kinds of stuff. And I had stuff like, there is one revelation, and I just had all the preacher jokes in there. I knew, it was a great meeting, but there were, there was testy parts in there. Sure. And so we needed to laugh. And so I was going to have fun. Well, no, Dr. Grace was afraid to face his student and sent somebody else to do his dirty work. And it was a pastor by the name of Ben Lacey. Ben, I know mostly online and did not really know him that well to know what was coming. But I shared my thing and I changed it on the fly basically to be like, hey, my name is Matt Hensley, messenger from First Baptist Farmersville. It took everything not to say Hogwarts. And I stood up and I said, I just have a simple request that you take the S off of the end of Psalms and just let it be Psalm. It is singular. Yeah, I said some comment like that. And he backs up, confers with the people, and then he walks back up to the mic and he says, we will take this as a friendly amendment if it comes from a Rangers fan. At which point I leaned into the microphone and I said, here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God, or something like that. And I walked away. And everybody's some clapping, some laughing. It was great. And then I sit back down. And then the moderator, whatever, comes back. Light comes back up to microphone 2 where I was, and the light comes back up, and he said, "Is there an objection or something? Call to order, whatever it was, from camera 2, mic 2, whatever." And I'm waiting, like nobody is there, and I realize what I've done. They had a little touchscreen thing, and it was like for was a button with a thumbs up, against with a thumbs down, urgent requests, and then some, like maybe point of order. I don't know. There was something over to the end. Nothing there ever said friendly amendment, unfriendly amendment, any, like I didn't know what to use.
Yeah.
And so when I pressed it at first, when I stood up and there was no movement on the stage, then I pressed the second button, still no movement. I pressed the third button. I pressed all of these buttons on that thing. And so I stood up and I said, "Hey, I didn't know what button to push. I pressed all of them," much like, you would expect from Matt Hensley. And so then as I was leaving, I said into the mic, "Go Astros." And so in a way, it passed unanimously, the amendment and all of that good stuff. And so yeah.
See, this is why, at the SBC, there's a page there to help you understand which button to push, because the screen, it's not a complicated device, but it is a little confusing when you see all the buttons there. And it's true.
Let me tell you, there was a page there.
Oh, okay.
And that page is a friend. I'm not going to call him out, but I will tell you that friend, if he listens to this, will remember that I asked him specifically, "What do I press on that button or on that screen?" And he said, "I don't really know. I would assume it's for if your, amendment is for it." And so that's what I pressed at first. And then there was no movement on the stage, and they were ready to vote. And I was like, no, like I was about to be, who was that guy years ago at the annual meeting that just started yelling? Well, that happens a lot. Anyway,
it does happen a lot.
It does. So that was my my thing. Second time I fixed grammar in a resolution. That's something I feel like I can get away with and not worry about in my position as a DOM ever, if I was speaking for or against a particular thing. Even though I would be coming as a messenger from First Farmersville, I would still be representing in some fashion.
Yeah.
Pastors, maybe a little to the right of me, left of me, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So I have to be a little careful there. But that's one I thought I could get away with, and I did, and
well done.
Had fun. So
there you go. There was your moment.
That was my moment, and so it was a good time. A lot of great stuff happened. And did you go to Texas Baptist? Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did.
Yeah. They met in July down in McAllen.
So they decided, let's go to the surface of the sun in July, basically in Mexico, in McAllen, Texas, and it was so blooming hot. And but we got to go to both of them. It was good to see it both and see what God is doing through the BGCT, otherwise known as Texas Baptist, or the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. The SBTC, otherwise known as Bart Barber's place. So it's good to see you, and it's good to do this. What are we talking about today? I have talked a little bit too much.
Today we are talking about authority. It's a bit of a buzzword in our culture at the moment, right? But here's what we're going to talk about. This is based on an article that Mark Halleck has posted at the Replant blog, and it's really simply this. In your church, either Jesus and his word will have authority, or somebody or something else will. That's it. That's what we're talking about today. Yeah. Who has authority in your church? Now, let's caveat this, because, well, I don't want to say no one, because there might be a church out there that would say, no, absolutely, Jesus doesn't have authority. Miss Mildred has authority. But most, for the vast majority of churches and pastors, if you were just to ask, who has authority in your church, you'd probably say Jesus, the Bible, right? We believe in the authority of God's word. But on a practical level, the way you make decisions, or that one person that you're like highly afraid of offending, and who has the power to say no, and then everything falls apart. Like, in reality, that's the thing or the person that has authority. And so we're going to talk this morning about what do you do if you realize that someone or something else has the authority in your church, and how do you address that? How do you go about restoring Jesus' authority in his church?
Which is perfect timing because 2 days in a row, I have or am in the process of posting near viral memes.
Near viral.
Today's was weird pastor facts, and you open it up, and it's the guy pointing at the page that says, "Many people will ignore any biblical mistake you make while preaching, but will completely lose their minds if you remove a 50-year-old decoration from the back of
Oh
the
yeah.
that their Auntie
Yep.
Helga sewed." That's definitely true. And then the one that I posted yesterday was probably my favorite, but it has the picture of a guy leaning over. I'm sure this is from a very well known movie that I'm not cultured enough to know, but it has this. He's reaching out to pull up the one that says new pastor, and it says search
Yeah.
committee trying to find a pastor who stays longer than 2 to 3 years. And then in the next frame, it has Danny DeVito with a 2x4
Yes.
poking it in the man's face, and it says 40-year chairman of the deacon board with the quote, "Oh no, you don't." And so that one, I'll tell you what, that one got a whole lot of traction, but it also got some people that got a little salty. That was like, "Man, you think this is funny? It's not funny for the person living it." And I said, "That's exactly why I posted it, because I've lived it." And so
Yes. Yep.
anyway, anyhow, that is the topic today. Who is
Yeah.
in control of
Yeah.
your church? So in the article, we'll put this in the show note, and he calls this the number one challenge in
Mm.
most declining and dying churches, and that deals with the issue of authority.
Yeah.
And, think about it. Any team, baseball, football, basketball, otherwise, even could be super talented and everything else. How often they struggle when there's not a true leader, the one
Yeah.
running it, the one that's the captain, the guy that everybody looks to for leadership. And so, in the case of a church, it's almost going to be universally true that it is going to struggle and die
Yep.
if they don't know who is the true authority. And that's not the senior pastor. That's,
Right.
that's what we're talking about today. And that's also not the deacon chairman or the
Yep.
personnel committee chairman or the finance committee chairman. Might be the treasurer, but it's supposed to be Jesus. So let's talk about that. Kyle, dig in a little.
Yeah. So the reason I think this is so prevalent and so important in declining and dying churches is because oftentimes, if you have a church that's declined over a number of years, um, there comes to exist a vacuum of leadership, right? I mean, so especially if maybe you had maybe there was a pastoral tenure or a couple of pastoral tenures that just didn't exhibit strong leadership and didn't lead well. What often happens is you lose high capacity leaders. If there's no real leadership, your lay leaders typically aren't going to stick around if they're high capacity. Maybe through the years, the church has just aged and and for whatever reason, I mean, the high capacity leaders have either passed away or they've had to move on. Maybe it's no one person's fault. That's just the pattern that developed over the years. But there's a vacuum of leadership, and so when that happens, someone or something will fill that role, right? So if you don't have a pastor, or you don't have someone who's constantly calling the church to look to Jesus and reminding them of what His Word says, something else will take that place. I think this goes back to our worship problem, or our worship, um, um, the way that we're designed to worship. I should say it like that. In that we're going to find something to fill that hole. And so, listen, if there's not someone pointing you to Jesus, there will be someone who is constantly making a ruckus and will make sure that they have the authority. Or something in the church will drive that. And it might be a parlor, it might be a certain style of music. but something will be the authority. Something will take a primary position in that church. And here's the thing: if it's not King Jesus, then the question becomes: is that a true New Testament church? If your ultimate authority is something other than Jesus Christ and His Word, is that a true church? And I think if you read the letters to the seven churches in Revelation, there's some question there about how long a church can function if Christ Jesus does not have that primary place. So one of your tasks, and we talk often in church revitalization, we talk often about the practical side of things, right? Here's some things you need to fix. But church revitalization, church replanting is primarily spiritual. It's a spiritual battle to allow Christ Jesus to have control over His church. And I think this is true. Every single church that I've seen that finds itself in need of revitalization has lost sight of that somewhere, right? So most of the time, I've never been approached by a church that says, "Man, we need to be revitalized. We're struggling, but man, we've baptized so many people over the last year. We have so many, we're making disciples." Because typically churches that are making disciples don't find themselves in need of revitalization, right? If you've baptized 30 people in the last year, you may not need to do revitalization. You have life in your church. Most of the time when we're approached by a church that says, "Hey, we're really struggling. I think maybe we need this revitalization stuff," they probably haven't baptized anybody in quite a while. They're not reaching their community. Typically, those are the patterns that we've seen, and so that tells me that something else has taken place, and they're following something practically other than King Jesus. And so the work of revitalization is restoring a church, restoring. You're not restoring Jesus's authority because He always has authority, but you are refocusing the church's attention upon King Jesus.
Yeah. And this is something that some of us as pastors don't often help. And let me explain. One is sometimes we do a disservice when we wear all the hats. We talk about being, the generalist or what's the actual
resourceful generalist.
Resourceful, like you have to. There's times you got to lead the music hall, I guess. And when everything rises and falls on you, and you are the great one, the one that is doing everything and accomplishing everything. You're the one that's going out knocking on doors, all that kind of stuff. We get it. But then when you're gone in 2 to 3 years to the next church, and like you said, that leaves that vacuum of, well, who's going to step up? And I'll tell you who's the true authority of these churches that have that, the regular rotation of pastors. And there's nothing really wrong necessarily with a church like Mayhill kind of identified themselves as, we want to be a place where somebody can come and sharpen their skills and continue to pursue education and then send them on. Like they were good with that. I mean, that was something they kind of adopted when I came. But the other side of that is when that's regular, 2 to 3 years, just a steady rotation, there's still that 6 to 12 month process of finding the next pastor. And if you want to find the true authority of that church, more often than not, I'm going to throw out a random statistic of 96.8%. I don't have it, but 96.8% of the time, it's going to be the person that those people look to in those in-between days. That's the guy that, the new pastor needs to ultimately lean in on and trust and build trust and build rapport, all that. That's another topic for another day. But ultimately, that true kind of authority and figure at that church is going to be the one that is kind of standing in the gap in those in-between days and those in-between seasons. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If that person is pointing them to Christ and His word, that becomes a bad thing when that person does not, and certainly when the pastor comes in and does not. But because Jesus is the authority, His word is our foundation, all of that kind of stuff, and so if true revitalization, Mark Halleck says, is going to take place, a dying or declining church, and I would say any church, must first humble itself and recognize that King Jesus and his word are the final authority, not your bylaws, not your senior pastor, not the chairman of the deacons, not Aunt Helga or whatever that I posted that meme from, but Christ and his word. Kyle?
Yeah, and this is how he wraps it up. And I think this is so good, this last paragraph. It's true in our individual lives, and it's true in our churches. Revitalization and renewal begins with submission to King Jesus and his word. Every other aspect of revitalization builds upon this foundation. So, in Reclaiming Glory, Mark Clifton talks about the 6 imperatives. There's lots of practical stuff. We talked about the characteristics of replanters. All those things are important, but they're all built upon this foundation, submission to King Jesus and his word. And Halleck wraps up his article this way. He says, without it, a dying congregation should not expect God to move in power to bring their church back to health and vibrancy. It's pretty powerful, right? I mean, you go back to the 7 letters, you look at Ephesus, right? They had a lot of things going on. And yet what did Jesus tell them? You've lost your first love. They lost sight of Jesus Christ and his word. And so that's the very first letter we see in Revelation is Jesus calling this church back to this spiritual foundation of the authority of Christ.
All right. Well, Kyle, great article. Mark, I know you probably are too busy to listen to this, but you did a good job, and well done. And we hope this was an encouragement to you, and maybe we can dig into some practical ways soon of how you can kind of see this happen, and in some simple ways. And so, Kyle, I appreciate you. It's good to see you this week, and we're grateful for the work that God is doing in the BGCT, SBTC here in Texas, and seeing a lot of great reports across the country. This is kind of annual meeting season, and for associations and state conventions, and so it's exciting to see some people I think you and I know nominated and elected as president, including Craig Carlisle, the most voting person on the planet, is now the president for Alabama, and so that's pretty cool. And so a lot of great stuff happening across the country, and we're grateful for that and encourage you to lean into that process. Be there, go there, correct the grammar and the resolutions all day long, and be a part of what God is doing on the state level, on the local level, and of course in the national level, which we still got months to go, but it will be here before you know it. So Kyle, send us out.
Hey, thanks for listening. And until next time, which will be Black Friday, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel you declare.
What's wrong with you people?